We're
Obligatory cheers.
Obligatory cheers.
Do you just feel like there is no air left to breathe? Do you just
And you have a healer. That was going to be one of my questions, obviously, was who was the first person that you ever really, came out to?
Yeah.
And your idea of coming out at this point was just admitting I wear women's clothing, period.
Exactly.
And then what happened?
And he's like, you and your wife are trying to have a kid together. It is healthy if you discuss it with her. And so he helped me, he coached me, and I told my wife one time, okay, I need to talk to you about some things. And of course I was in the fear zone and procrastination zone. And so finally I told her, and I would say it's like sticking my foot out of the closet door.
Wiggling it around a little bit.
Exactly. And then it's like, oh my God, is it cold out there? I better take it back in. She didn't speak to me for 5 days. And I was so entrenched in our marriage. It's like, no, I'll never do that again. And no, we'll work everything out. And no. So I'm already in this extreme way of self-compromising, just to make it all work. And so that was really the first time that I actually discussed with anybody. And by the way, yes, the internet existed at the time. I would self-express my feelings of femininity on the chat rooms that existed at the time, which was, I'll date myself, America Online, and so forth. Yeah.
What year was this when the healer came into your life?
1998.
1998. Okay, I can put that in context. I hadn't come out to Kevin yet. It took another couple of years for me to come out to Kevin, but I can identify with that. I stuck my toe out. He didn't, I don't know if we didn't talk, but he moped around for about 5 days, and I didn't talk about it again for 3 years. So I essentially had to come out twice. How many times? How long? Okay,
gosh.
she didn't talk to you for 5 days, and then you just went on like nothing had ever happened.
Exactly. That's what we did.
It's like, how do people do that?
I look back at some of that and like, oh my God, what was I doing? So yeah, it was what had happened is, what I'm seeing on the internet is the explosion of the transgender scene here in Los Angeles. And I'm seeing all the clubs, and I'm seeing and I would just look at that with such jealousy and escapism and all of that. But I was so invested in that life. I was extremely invested in my life, and so I just wanted to keep that going. And is it okay if I kind of fast forward in the narrative? Because really, like, to get to the point is that at one point, I'd always fantasize like, God, I have to go to these clubs and I have to do these things that are there. And so what happened was my wife at the time was going to go back to her country for a wedding, which I couldn't go back to, which she lived in the Caribbean. And so if you go back there, it's a long voyage there. So you just don't go there for a few days. You're going there for weeks. And so she went there for weeks, and I thought, this is my chance.
To really do some exploring
and
step out.
And so I contacted some people on the internet and said, look, I really want to do this. I want to experience this. And then every one of them said, okay, well, I think there's a difference between, coming out has many meanings to all of us. And so usually coming out as trans means presenting in public for the first time as how you identify.
Right.
And so in this case, I talked to a few people that I knew online in the trans community. I had one wonderful lady she encouraged me. It's very funny. She's gorgeous. She's still my friend, still my best friend, a really close friend. And she had these words that just stuck with me. She's like, what are you waiting for? And what's going to be your excuse next month? It's like, oh. So I arranged through that. I arranged with, there's a makeup artist who did transgender makeovers. And so I arranged this whole thing. And it was just like, it's one of those things, oh my gosh, it's an irrevocable act. Once you do it, you can't
Yeah.
dial it back,
Yeah.
because all these connections in your life start to happen.
Things start to make sense.
Oh yeah,
The
Thing-
good and the bad.
all of that.
Yeah.
Things start to make sense,
Uh-huh.
and it's kind of, once you've tasted that fruit, it's like, you know, all of a sudden it really becomes a lot like the movie, like the Matrix movie. You have like two things in front of you. You have this life here, and you have that life there.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No, not at all.
Mhm.
And so at first I thought, well, maybe I can just party on the week. I can be a weekend party girl. and I'll do it this way and kind of keep the rest of my gig, my life, my blah, blah, blah. I'll keep all that going. That lasted for about 8 months. Before,
I mean, what was your wife doing during these 8 months?
well, let's see. Let me go back to, she went back to her home for a wedding, stayed with her family, and then came back. And it was at that time that I had the real coming out conversation. Look, this is a need.
Yeah.
This is who I am.
And she had a preview, a little
Yeah.
tiny preview.
Yeah.
How did she take it that second time?
It's kind of like this. It didn't go well. It's kind of like I left the closet and she went into the closet with respect to her husband.
She wasn't going to tell anybody.
Exactly.
Right.
So at that time, I'm just kind of like that horse that's been released from the stable. And, I started to engage a gender therapist on my own, privately, because I knew this was like way beyond my, I knew I needed help to navigate it. And I think eventually, about a year later, I even, to my ex's, she's now my ex, obviously, to her credit, she tried to stick it out for a while to see if it would work. And to her credit, she tried really hard. But at a certain point, once I started the medical part of the transition, and once I continued that, and that really means starting hormonal replacement therapy, which means I'm taking estrogen and suppressing testosterone.
Right.
That's what the medication does. And so once I started that, not only started it, but continued its upward path, that was the beginning and the end of our marriage.
Was it because you were acting on it, or was it because you were changing?
All of the above.
All of it.
I mean, if you could imagine from a point of view of empathy towards my ex, all of a sudden you have your husband, now your husband's growing breasts.
I've read books, I've heard
Yes.
stories of people who have stuck it out forever, and people who are like, nope. People who wanted to try, who did try, and then. So in the end, was it amicable? Was it peaceful? Was it?
No, it was in the beginning parts of my transition between the two of us. Mutually, it was explosive.
Explosive.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of.
A lot of emotion.
Oh yeah, the roller coaster.
Yeah, it's a roller
The roller
coaster because
coaster.
really you're dealing with your identities. Your identity as a husband and wife, her identity as a wife, my identity as the husband. It's like, I don't think I can be the husband anymore. I'm going to be her. I'm not going to be him. And so that in and of itself is one of the most, it's what could be the most unsettling, intense, it's like the existential crisis.
It is, and I don't want to dismiss that, but I think that we've honored that part of your story.
Thank you.
Let's move on.
Okay, moving on.
Moving on.
So I think the end of 2015 is when I started my hormonal replacement therapy, or I started the medical aspect of transitioning. And then I just started slowly going through the progression of things to do.
Okay. When you first started taking the hormones, there are parts of your body that change, and there are parts of you who you expect to change, because I can only assume you've done a lot of research on this and talked to people. Was there anything that happened that was unexpected, whether it was unpleasant or awesome?
I think, to feel, first of all, when I first started taking it, it was just like, oh my God, it felt like water in a parched desert.
Oh.
it just like, it's like, oh my God, I never knew this would make me feel so good. And what it
It's
also
like getting the medication your body has always craved.
exactly. And I think on the other hand, you can hear my voice getting sketchy as I even remember it.
It's all right.
I think also, I think, and to this day that still continues, is all of a sudden, oh my God, female emotions. Ah! You know, and so to this day, the profundity of that experience is so different than the masculine
Really? So
experience.
you've seen it from two different sides. Explain that.
Well, first of all, in the process, the body starts to change, and the fat in the body starts to redistribute. So, get a little bit of an ass, thighs, breasts start to grow, my skin softens up. One thing I noticed quite many people have commented on this, but it's my, how shall I say, when I work out, all of a sudden my clothes are less stinky.
Oh,
They smell a lot better.
you smell differently.
Yeah, smell differently. But I think emotionally, all of a sudden, like, cry at TV commercials for no reason. You know, puppy dog
Okay.
commercials, I would cry. You know, it's like, where did that come from? And starting to begin to experience, you know, the emotions I was meant to experience. But, you know, the ways of coping with it, I don't have all that experience. You know,
Right.
in life, it's brand new.
Okay.
And so to experience all these,
Right.
you know, in a way, sometimes a hormonal treatment is called a second puberty.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you have a second, you know,
Yeah.
we all know what it's like when we, as normal people that we are,
Yeah.
in quotes again, went through puberty,
Yeah.
right? Take that and experience that at 50.
I can, even though we call it a second adolescence when you come out later in life because
Sure.
you're experiencing emotions that you're either understanding them for the first time or you're getting yourself into relationships and situations where you're like experiencing things like jealousy for the first time.
Jealousy,
know,
yes, okay.
So I get that second adolescence. But it, I don't know if anything hormonally was changing for me. And I think that this is always the first part of the transitioning. But I think it's a part that I've never heard anybody talk about it in this way. And you were talking about what the testosterone did for you and your perspective on, you were talking about it allows you to be focused, which I think is interesting. I had a friend who coined it testosterone poisoning.
Yeah, that's you will hear that in the transgender community.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now you're like, ooh, glad I'm not dealing with as much of that as I used to have to
Yes.
deal with. So when one thing is going down and then the other thing is going up, I mean, your hormones and the estrogen is causing you to be more sensitive, you have to create more coping skills. Are there times
Yeah.
you wish that you had that
Oh, yeah.
testosterone poisoning just a little bit so you can deal with it? Like, oh my God, it's got to be overwhelming at times, I'm sure.
Very.
Okay.
But at the same time, you know, and I'm sure you'll hear this from many, it's a very euphoric feeling. It's a very, very euphoric feeling, you know, because all these things that were, you know, it's kind of like all these pathways in your brain that were meant to happen are being switched on. And so the euphoria is to experience that. It's just like incredible. I mean, I look back on those times with, you know, just almost, you know, rose-colored glasses. Like, oh my God, it's so unbelievable. But, you know, so yeah, definitely. You know, it's kind of like I told a friend, it's like transitioning was like you get the best and the greatest new iPhone or Samsung or whatever your favorite, but you don't have any contacts, you don't have any apps, you don't have any passwords, nothing, and it takes time to rebuild all that stuff up. So in a way, a transition's like that. You have the coolest thing ever. It's like, you know, the
Yeah.
body you're starting to want, the social life you start to want is starting to happen,
that
the
frickin'
connections, the yeah, but it's like, how does this all work? And oh my God, women are strange. How do I do this? How do I socialize with women? Ooh, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think even women who are coming out later in life, one of their biggest, I don't know, roadblocks, fears is how do I date women? How do I
Yes.
approach a woman? How do I find other lesbians, you know, that kind of thing. Well, that's for later. That's
Okay.
for the dating chapter. I'm still in this transitioning chapter. I watched Transparent.
Oh, transparent. Oh,
Transparent.
okay. Yeah.
I didn't watch it a lot, but I do remember an episode where the lead actor went, "I never knew that this could feel so good."
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That kind of thing, just
Yeah.
the subtle
Yeah, definitely.
way your skin perceives the world, even that changes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I
Absolutely.
mean, that's so subtle and it's so profound at the same time. I mean,
Yeah, there's
Kinda
a
blows my
lot of that. I mean, for me, even early on in that process, just going to the store and freely perusing all, women's clothing and shopping for styles and accents and all that, it's just like, oh my gosh, it's fantastic.
well, this is I think where the conversation is going to get difficult
Okay.
because obviously it's not easy. You have to deal with the money issues, and it's not like you walk into a clinic and say, "Make me a woman," and you walk out. Ta-da.
It's not Jack in the Box, no.
Not Jack in the Box. And it's not, the instant makeover. You probably have to deal with society too. So now going back to like your job, how are things, you're changing and what's happening with your profession?
Yeah. And okay, that's like a whole big topic. Everybody's circumstance is different. Thankfully, the ground, the ground has radically changed for many transgender people. Thankfully, it's better, but it is, especially transgender women, it can be extremely challenging. What happened to me was that I worked in infotech since the early 80s, all the way till 2016.
So you had a reputation you could fall back on.
Actually, no.
No.
What happened was, in a way, I worked so many different jobs in IT. And my last job, during the beginnings of my process, I mean, really prior to me starting the medical aspect of my transition, I just started to fall apart. Every part of me just fell apart. And it really came to that point whether either I transition or I'm not going to make it.
Right.
And so part of that equation was, did that affect my job performance? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so long story short, through things that happened where I was working, I'd gotten laid off. I gotten laid off with a very nice severance package, and that severance package helped push me forward into my straight into my transition.
So
really the only, I'm sorry if I interrupt.
No, go.
I was at a point where the only thing I could really do rather than work and career and the only thing I really could do was be myself and transition. And so
That became
that's kind of how my life unfolded. Later career and stuff, and we can talk about that more because that evolved totally differently.
So it was more about your job performance, not about any kind of discrimination that caused you to have to leave that position.
At that time, definitely. At that time, definitely.
So there has to have been times when you've been discriminated against.
Oh yeah. I tried to remarket myself in IT as myself. And there's a whole deep complexity to that, but it just never worked. And jobs that I used to be able to just nail wouldn't happen.
Was it because you were a woman, or was it because you were a transgendered woman?
It was hard to really have a good gauge on that, other than like, whoa, this is different. Because I always used to be able to close interviews. And I would get several interviews, and I'd get to like the last step, and I could never close. As Tawni, as transgender woman, I couldn't close them. I couldn't close the final deal. So that is extremely humbling experience. When my reality was so totally different previously.
Yeah.
Do you just feel like there is no air left to breathe? Do you just wanna to be left outside the grid? It's all for sure. You didn't know. I wanna